A very good morning here, and welcome to Portugal in the Algarve. We have got the qualifying session coming up for you first of all, and it's going to be a very interesting qualifying session at that. My name is Jack Nichols. Alongside me here in the commentary box is John Watson. And John, this is a circuit that really challenges the drivers, despite it being a sort of newer venue.
Indeed it is. It's a great circuit, 4.5 kilometers in length, 6 to 15 corners, some of which really you might call a double apex corner. But the thing that makes Portimao, I think, a really great racetrack is the elevation change. And some of those corners are exceedingly difficult. In particular, that roller coaster ride all the way from the top at turn 8, down the dip into turn 9, and the blind climb up into turn 10, followed by turn 11. And really, you're aiming for a spot in the sky because there are no other reference points. And it's a circuit that pays commitment, and expect to see a lot of that in qualifying shortly.
Here's a look at the circuit then, as it winds its way around the Portuguese countryside just north of the coast, about an hour or so from Faro. 4.7 kilometers long, 15 turns, and as ever 3 sectors, but it really does get quite undulating, and we'll see that when the cars take to the circuit in 2 or 3 minutes time. The qualifying session due to get underway at 8:45 local time, and despite it being that early, as we saw a moment ago on that weather graphic, it's still 22 degrees out there, so already the temperature's picking up, and yesterday we saw the fastest time in the first free practice session.
Yes, often the case, particularly at circuits where you do get high midday ambient temperatures. The best time was set by Thomas Enger, recovered from that awful accident he had 2 weekends ago at Slovakia, 143.9, compared to Jerome Blekemolen, also in a Lamborghini, with a 144.8. So there was the best part of 0.9 of a second in lap time between those 2 sessions. The session in the afternoon started 3:30. Whereas the session in the morning started just before lunchtime at 11:45.
So we can see the cars now out in the pit lane, getting ready to head out, and it looks as though it's going to be the first Bitec McLaren that will be making its way down the pit lane first of all. We'll wait and see who's piloting that, and there's the second Bitec car, the car of Sten Pentus and Chris van der Drift. And a thumbs up there as they get ready to head out onto the circuit. But there's the car of Fabio Anidi and his teammate Giorgio Pantano. It'll probably be Anidi going out first in this first session, I would have thought. The way it'll work, we'll have 2 15-minute sessions. The quickest times will, the top 10 quickest cars will then go to a pole position shootout, essentially, where they'll have another 10-minute session to try and find out who will start on pole position for the qualifying race, which is coming up today at 1:45 local time, and then that decides the grid for the main race, which comes tomorrow, and that starts at the same time, no, an hour later, sorry, 2:45 local time. There's Nicky Melnoff getting strapped in.
Yeah, it's a big difference, of course. Cars out much earlier onto the racetrack than they've been at any point during Friday's 2 unofficial practice sessions. So something for them all to learn. And tire temperature, we always keep going on the tire temperature, tire pressure, track conditions. And I mean, yesterday it was beautiful, clear blue skies, sun beating down on the racetrack. Right now we've got a fairly overcast sky. While the ambient is reasonable, it's an overcast sky, and there's a lot of moisture in the air, so that's going to translate into a different sense or feel drivers will experience through this wheel, through the steering wheel, through the whole body. Should be quick. Certainly the 3rd qualifying session, which is the one that will determine the grid, ought to be the quickest session that we're going to see, but it may just mean that a lot of drivers who are not maybe as experienced as the number 1 driver or the joint number 1 driver in some cases of these teams and cars can benefit from.
So there's the Fortec car making its way down, and that's Miguel Toril and Aman Ibrahim who are piloting that machine, as the green is now shown at the end of the pit lane and the cars can make their way out onto the circuit. There's one of our 2 new Mercedes this weekend, 2 cars entered by Sports and U, the Portuguese squad. Paulo Pinheiro and Francisco Moras sharing the 71 car, Antonio Coimbra and Luis Silva sharing the 72 car. But out on circuit now, we've got Fabio Anidi, and right behind him Mark Basseng, and Aman Ibrahim is the man who went out in that Fortec Mercedes. It's quite interesting that they decided to send Marc Basseng out there. He's the pro in the Pro-Am pairing of he and Alessandro Latifi, and certainly so far this season we've seen the second session tending to be quicker than the first.
Yeah, and I suspect the reason the team have done this is pure conjecture on my part, is that Marc Basseng, the more experienced of the two drivers, and as I mentioned earlier, track conditions, ambient temperature, track temperature, the moisture in the air. They're just looking at the Mercedes as it's come out of turn 3. You can see that it is easy to kick the back of the car out. Precisely the reason I suspect that the Phoenix Racing car that Marc Basseng is in, that's why Marc's behind the wheel, because you can go out and say the car is undrivable. So put the experienced guy in initially, and then you've got some sort of benchmark to work from.
There is the Mercedes that leads the championship at the moment in the Blancpain Sprint Series of Max Goetz and Max Buch. Max Buch returning this weekend, having missed the last race in Slovakia, and that's a real shame for him, because he is now, well, he essentially can't win the championship because his teammate Max Goetz has been in the car for the whole time. So if that car wins the championship, then technically it'll be Max Goetz who wins it, because he'll have more points. So that'll be an interesting one, as Marc Basseng now comes across the line then, and he's going to be the first man to start a flying lap, and he's pushing already.
Yes, he came very wide out of the final turn, turn 15. It's really a double corner, a very long corner, drops away from you. Fantastic corner in terms of, you know, we don't see the number of high-speed corners on racetracks that used to exist, but here at Portimao there is a great example of it, turn 15, and it is a big commitment, whether it's absolutely flat out at this point or whether you'll get there on your first or second or third flying lap. All conditional on those round black Pirelli tyres.
Basseng getting a little held up, I think, by his teammate Niki Melnov out there, as well as the new G-Drive Lamborghini of Roman Rusinov, and he and Thomas Enger have now joined partnership. G-Drive left their association with the WRT Audi squad. Rusinov claims because of the racing series that G-Drive back in Russia, it makes more sense to be with a Lamborghini, so that's what they're doing. But this is Marc Basseng now climbing the hill once more, really steep, and that's one of the many blind apices on this circuit, as he then drops down again and around towards the double left-hander of turn 13.
I mean, the run, you just got a very brief glimpse from the shot of the car going uphill into turn 10, turn 11, and what you see is simply sky. You can just about probably see the tops of little shrubberies and some of the debris fencing, but it is really difficult to place accurately your car to maximize the entry speed into turn 10, but critically to get the drive off turn 11, and turn 11 immediately you turn into it, it falls away. So if you're out of position at turn 11, it does have a bearing on your lap time.
Across the line then comes Marc Basseng, a 1:45.484. The quickest time we've seen so far this weekend, a 1:43.9 from Thomas Eng in the G-Drive racing car. There's the Silver Cup car of Vincent Abril and Mateusz Lazowski, currently 7th in the, 8th in the championship overall.
To just put that time of Marc Basseng into perspective, it's his first flying a lap, 1:45.4. If you took that time and transposed it into yesterday's afternoon session, he would have been 4th quickest out of the 20 runners that were running. So it's actually a very strong time, especially on your first flying lap. Now we're seeing other drivers all around the circuit indicating individual fastest sectors or overall quickest sectors. There's Maximilian Buch, the diminutive but very feisty young German, delighted to be back here at Blancpain, back behind the wheel of a racing car.
Yep, and I think it's Max Goetz in the car for this first session by the looks of things, and then it'll be Buch out in session number 2, and he is considerably up. Look at that, over half a second up in the first sector. Yesterday the Mercedes and the BMWs couldn't really hold a torch to the Lamborghinis out front, but we'll see whether things are different when it comes to qualifying. But then again, that 84 Mercedes hasn't really been strong in qualifying all season. It's mainly been down to their race pace. They usually start 5th or 6th on the grid in the qualifying race. Yeah, I mean, it's a strong partnership. It's a great car. It's a super team. 2 young drivers, both German, and again, just watching the look of other angle of turn 11, you see the drop away. But it's a very good race package, and
while getting pole position, starting in the front row of the grid, is a great accolade to the drivers and to the teams. At the end of the day, it's what you can score in an event, and in particular in the Sunday race, the championship races, I maybe prefer to call it, where there is a much larger haul of points. So what you're really doing qualifying here this morning is to get a good grid position for today's race, to try and guarantee yourself a strong finish, to get as far to the front as you can for the event on Sunday.
So Max goes across the line and he's second quickest at 1:44.574 because Marc Basseng has improved to do a 1 minute 44.481. So it's the Phoenix Audi of Marc Basseng that is currently quickest of anyone. There is Cesar Ramos at the wheel. Currently third quickest is David Fuminelli in his Royale BMW. Fabio Onidi looking quick. He's done the fastest first sector of anyone now, and he now climbs the hill. The Italian racing for the Bitec McLaren squad. He and Giorgio Pantano, a very strong driver lineup.
And coming down from turn 8 through turn 9 looks so easy on camera. When you physically are driving at that point of the racetrack, you think there is no way that that's going to be a flat out turn 9. And of course these cars make it look so easy.
Absolutely. Now coming towards the final sequence of right-handers, Maximilian Goetz has now gone quickest of anyone in sector 1 at 32.6. But let's see what Fabio Onidi's got then. A personal best in the second sector as well, as you can see, at 33.487. Not quite as close to the apex around that final corner as we've seen from some cars. And he heads towards the line now. And let's see what sort of lap time he can pull out in that car. Onidi goes... No, he comes into the pits then. So decides to bail out of that one by the looks of it. So not quite sure why. He was looking good there.
Well, Maximilian Goetz is the car that's really potentially the biggest threat to Marc Basseng. Still quickest on that 1 minute 44.4. Max Goetz fastest overall sector 1, personal best sector 2, and in fact goes quickest overall 1 minute 43.970, thousandths of a second just behind the very best time set by Thomas Enger in the first session on Monday. On Monday? Where am I? On Friday morning.
So we're watching Alex Zanardi now out on the circuit in his new livery for this weekend. The Royale Motorsport team surprised him with this livery, having come back from a very successful trip at the Handbike World Championships, where he defended his time trial gold medal. And so as a result, they've liveried up his car in a very fetching colour scheme, and he was quite pleased, and he said for once speechless.
I don't know whether the yellow is meant to represent gold. It may well be that it is, but it looks, it's not working in the way that maybe it would be hoped it would do. But such an interesting personality, Alex Zanardi. Reading an article in a monthly periodical, an English motorsport periodical, by a former Formula 1 driver called John Miles, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, teammate to Jochen Rindt, who then became, amongst many things, an engineer at Lotus in the early 90s, and Alex Zanardi was one of the drivers that he looked after, and he was extremely flattering about Alex Zanardi's intellectual and intelligence capacity, comparing him to others of that era who he wasn't quite so flattering about.
That's interesting, yeah. So Zanardi...
No, he thought Zanardi was one of the most intelligent people, not just racing driver, but people he's ever had to deal with in a race team.
Wow, high praise indeed, as we now see the 76 car, which is currently in the hands of Thomas Jaeger, and this is the car that won overall in Slovakia, despite only entering 2 events in Zandvoort and Slovakia. They're 6th in the championship, only 6 points behind Enzo Ede and René Rast.
Yeah, I mean, what a brilliant job Thomas Jaeger and Dominic Baumann did in Slovakia. They were almost in a class of their own, and took victory on the Sunday event. Not necessarily finding here Portimao, the circuit that's as favourable to them as they had hoped. And in fact, I think they ended up, I'm just trying to find out where they were, in fact, in Monday, on Friday's running, nowhere near the pace that they expected to have, on a racetrack that is fundamentally a downforce driven circuit rather than a not top speed circuit. Here you come through the final turn 15, at leads on to the main straight in itself, not a particularly long straight, but with a very high-speed corner exiting onto that straight. So I would have thought the BMW might have been further up the field than we're seeing it currently.
16th place across the line then, and now we see Cesar Ramos and Stefano and Laurens Vanthoor's car, which as of yet has not set a competitive lap time. It's Cesar Ramos at the wheel. 22 cars out there on the circuit with 4 minutes to go. Max Goetz still quickest, Sergei Afanasiev second quickest, third now is Harry Procek in the Grassa Lamborghini, and fourth is Caca Bueno in the Brazilian BMW. So they seem to have got that BMW hooked up quite nicely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I would have expected BMW to be. I mean, certainly in the top 6. Interestingly, WRT have decided not to send their 2 cars. Number 1 is the Cesar Ramos car. We're looking at number 2 is Enzo Eid, who will share with Rennie Rast. They've waited, held back until the last few minutes of this session before they send their 2 drivers out. There is the number 1 car coming through, Cesar Ramos, and that is a committed exit out of turn 15.
Yep, he's done a personal, well, he's obviously done a personal best in his second sector because that's his first lap of the session so far, and he goes up to 11th place then on his first flying lap of 44.7, but expect him to improve on the second lap.
Marc Bassang has gone quickest, 143.912, 5 thousandths of a second quicker than Maximilian Goetz.
But Goetz is now on a hot lap. He's just done the fastest first sector of anyone, so interesting battles at the top of the times here, and usually we see Q2 being the quickest, but we'll wait and see whether that's the same case this weekend. There's Francisco Moura in the 71 Mercedes, the Sports and New machine, who have joined us this weekend, the Portuguese squad at their home race, hoping to perform strongly. And let's see what sort of lap time this is from Moura. He hasn't, it's an out lap, so it won't be particularly impressive, but he comes across now to start a flyer down towards turn 1. We're using the quicker version of turn 1 as opposed to the chicane that you can just see there. Some championships decide to use that hairpin and chicane to create a better opportunity at the first corner, but the drivers don't tend to really like it. It's a bit of a clumsy corner.
It tends to break up the flow in the first sector of the circuit, and frankly, you having artificial corners called chicanes, they don't do anything. I mean, if it's a safety factor, that's one thing, but if it's just done because it's possible to include it, well, I would rather see it excluded than be included. Max
Goetz remains second quickest. He ended up about 1/10 of a second slower than Marc Bassang on that last lap, despite setting the fastest first sector of anyone, as Francisco Moura now climbs the hill. He's in the Pro-Am pairing with Paulo Pinheiro in that car, flashing through the left-hander, the sparks kicking out from underneath that Mercedes, and he is a second down at the moment after that second sector. Still no news, still no appearance really from Enzo Eid.
Well, he's been out, done one timed lap and gone back into the pits, 150.5, slowest of all the 22 cars here this morning, and later for the first of the 2 races at Portimao. So there is either a problem for this particular car. Can't see what they're benefiting from not letting Enzo Eid get more time behind the wheel this morning.
No, it's interesting because perhaps that's quite wide. There's a few cars, in fact it's just come up on the timing screens that car 71 must respect the track limits, and that is Francisco Moura as he comes across the line to go 16th, but he's then immediately demoted because Fabio Nidi behind him went up to 15th place. Still Marc Bassang the quickest man of anyone, and he's just done a personal best in the first sector.
And there's also a Nidi who dives up the inside into turn 2. He's also been given a warning about respecting track limits. Mostly it's at the exit of turn 15.
Sergei Afanasiev currently third quickest then still. Harry Procek in the Grassa Lamborghini 4th. Caca Bueno in the BMW Team Brazil car in 5th position. And then it's Lucas Wolf, Vincent Abril, Nicky Mermanov, Matthias Stumpf and Sten Pentus completing the top 10. So that's good work from Sten Pentus if he can hold that top 10 position till the end of this session. But as we say, it'll most likely be the second qualifying segment that is the quickest. We're watching Marc Bassang now. A personal best in the first sector. His middle sector is pretty strong. Let's see what he's got as he comes out of the final corner and across the line. Is this going to be an improvement from Marc Bassang? He's already set the fastest time of the weekend so far, and he is unable to improve on that. A message to all drivers has just been sent out. Do you need another briefing concerning track limits? That's what the race director is asking them.
Well, I'm glad somebody's got a sense of humour in race control. But it's always at turn 15. It's a natural thing for a driver to do, and the exit of a long corner, a double apex corner in effect, to try and free the car up as quickly as possible to give you the maximum corner exit speed. But even further around the racetrack, or even, I shouldn't say further around, coming out of, for example, turn 4, the uphill left-hand turn, very easy to let your car run wide over the exit and try and pick up some time. And really, turn 14 is the only other part where you might get up. Turn 15 is the major issue for race director. And I would not be surprised to have a message sent to every team, to their drivers, to remember what was discussed in the driver's briefing, and that is, as a general message, not just specifically here to Portimao, but the track limits are there for a purpose. They're not there to be abused.
So across the line goes the 72 car in the hands of Antonio Combra. No improvement from him. He remains down in 19th position. We've seen another Roman Rusinov and Enzo Ede then. But I'd say those are the only two who haven't really set a competitive lap time. They've both been out, set a timed lap and come back in as per the regulations. You can't just sit out the session. But I reckon, you know, they accept that the quickest time is probably going to come in Q2, probably with, no disrespect to Ede or Rusinov, but they're quicker teammates, so maybe they're sitting out for that reason. Here's a look at the results after qualifying one. A 1 minute 43.912 is the time to beat. Marc Basseng setting it in the Phoenix Racing Audi. Max Goetz and Max Buch finishing second quickest. It was Goetz who set the time, just 5 thousandths of a second behind Basseng. Sergei Afanasiev third for the second HTP Mercedes, and then in fourth place the Grasser racing car of Harry Projik and Jeroen Bleekemolen. They are the men chasing down Max Goetz and Max Buch at the top of the championship, just 18 points behind with 3 rounds of the series still to go. Fifth place for Caca Bueno. Good strong performance from the BMW Team Brazil squad, much higher up than their Team Schubert counterparts. Sixth place for Lucas Wolf and Lucas Stultz, Vincent Abril and Matej Stosowski. In 7th place, Nicky Meyer-Melnoff qualifying there in the 8th position, half a second down on his teammate Marc Basseng. 9th spot for Matej Stump in the second BMW Team Brazil car. And then the Bitec McLaren of Sten Pentus completing the top 10 from that session, and that's encouraging for the Bitec McLaren team, who haven't had too much success so far this season, and they'll be hoping that they can have a change of fortune here in Portimao as we continue to look down the order. And the Roa BMWs and the Sports and the Team Schubert BMWs both seem to be quite slow, whereas the Brazilians have got it all together.
It's strange. I mean, the performance of the Schubert BMW in Slovakia was revolutionary 2 weeks ago, and so was the driving of Thomas Jaeger and Dominic Baumann, but they've got an issue here with the circuit. They can't dial their car in, and I can't explain it. 18th position, a car that was quicker than anything by a substantial margin, is now struggling to get into the top 20.
So there is Zanardi there in 13th place, as we said, him and Fuminelli, and then Rusinov and Ede, neither of them really setting a representative lap time, as they will now get ready to take over for the second session. And well, here's a look at the track limits, John.
Yes, I mean, that is exceeding the track limits. I would say that you're allowed to put 2 wheels over the red and white curbing onto the green. It's not AstroTurf as such, it's just a green concrete, but where all 4 wheels are over the red and white demarcation, let's call that, and then that's where you're going to get notification from the race director. That's probably about acceptable from the Baumann Jaeger BMW. Let's look at the number 1 Audi WRT. This is the car that Cesar Ramos on the limit. Cesar Ramos just about probably acceptable, but anything where all 4 wheels are completely, so again, just right on what would be an acceptable limit. In fact, you probably would think a pushman luck there, but I might get away with it.
So we only had, I think we only had 1 lap time cancelled out in that last session, which was for Fabian Hamprecht. About halfway through the session, his time got deleted, and there we can see Max Buch back at the wheel of the 84 Mercedes after he was replaced for the Slovakia ring. But he's back in the car now at a circuit that he won at back in 2012 in the FIA GT3 European Championship. He and Dominic Baumann, it was, took victory in one of the races. The other one they spun out of at the final corner. I can't remember who was driving when they spun. I'll have to find that out and mention it to one of them. But it's good to have Max Buch back here again. And there's Stef Dusseldorp sitting at the wheel alongside Sergei Afanasiev, and they've had a difficult season, down in 9th place in the championship. They've had 4 retirements and 1 non-start so far. They've only seen the checkered flag on 3 occasions out of the 8 races we've had so far this season.
Well, that's a very unrepresentative record for a strong partnership. The young Russian driver and the tall, lanky Dutchman. I mean, I just think about Spa 24, where that car came up over Radeon. It was a 3-wheeled SLS Mercedes-Benz, or 2 weekends ago in Slovakia, contact, no fault of Stef Dusseldorp, got tagged by Thomas Enger as he was spearing off the racetrack. And when those events occur, you're some degree a passenger.
Yeah, he then got collected later on, I think it was by Sten Pentus, who is the man lining up actually at the end of the pit lane, or actually more likely to be Chris van der Drift in that green Bitec McLaren that looked pretty strong. And it's van der Drift who now heads out onto the circuit, a very experienced racer. His single-seater career had to sort of take a bit of a halt after his nasty accident at Brands Hatch in Super League Formula, but he's back racing now in GT cars, and both of the Bitec McLarens go out there. And then there's Miguel Toril heading out, and then Thomas Enger. That orange Lamborghini is a car that we expect to be very strong, the G-Drive Lamborghini, and they've had a lot of work to do, the Rider squad, because they've had to basically build up a new car since Slovakia, because, well, Enger wrecked it. And here out comes Alex Zanardi. He gets to have another one and all, and there's a bit of a moment for Fabian Hamprecht, and that was in Q1.
Yes, and that was in the final turn 15, and he got it all wrong really at the first apex, where the back end of the car, one suspects, sort of snapped into a quick oversteer, and once it happens at that speed, at that point in the corner, well, you're just going to sit there and wait for it to finish. Fortunately, there's a huge amount of runoff along with a gravel trap to bring the car safely to a halt.
So
yes. It is, in photographs I've seen of the car, it didn't look quite so orange, it looked more red, but that's a very distinctive colour. Thomas Enger now behind the wheel, and obviously no ill effects from his moment where he'd been, what, 3 loops and a half tuck and
yeah,
whatever.
Exactly.
It was a scary moment. In fact, I think he got pretty well rattled around in the cockpit while the car was in the process.
But I think he was back out racing last weekend. I think he was racing Reiter's Chevy Camaro somewhere, so he's been on the mend quite quickly. And there's Marcus Winkelhock sat at the wheel, and he had a strong run here in the GT1 World Championship back in 2012. Into the first corner comes the 60 car, Giorgio Pantano, into, as we now watch, Sasha Halek just behind, but now up over the crest comes Giorgio Pantano, down towards the hairpin. And the Italian on the brakes, the McLaren looking pretty lively under braking, but it's quite a bumpy circuit.
Down the hill into turn, I think it's turn 5. It always has been bumpy. There's quite frequently you'll see drivers going offline to try and avoid those bumps, because if you've got a car that is pitch sensitive, and McLaren has sometimes been guilty of that, it just unsettles the car, and it means that the whole approach, commitment, entry and acceleration off the corner is not so good. Great view into turns 10, then this is the turn 11 where it falls away from you, so you need to have the car right on that apex. Otherwise, if you miss it, you're going to be all over the place. Then the quick run through the quick left-hander, then into turn 13, and a short sprint on the throttle into 14 again, the corner of the apex, You can see how it falls away, quite difficult to get the car in, and ideally you want to get the car in early and then let the car work its way out. Here's the best corner on the racetrack, I think, by far. A proper high-speed corner, and then don't overrun on the exit and don't get the attention of the race director. Yep,
and don't come into the pits if you want to set a hot lap. So Pantano coming into the pit lane, and he will now well, perhaps just adjust the tyre pressures, or perhaps that was just a preliminary check for the number 60 Bitech McLaren. In he comes, and it looks as though they're changing the tyres potentially on that McLaren, which is quite an interesting tactic with 10 minutes and 50 seconds to go then. At the moment it's Thomas Eng who is the quickest man of anyone.
And quickest of anybody so far this weekend by the best part of 0.3 of a second. That 143.6 eclipsing the 143.9 that Thomas Eng achieved in yesterday's first free practice session.
There is the Czech driver. A handful of Formula 1 appearances for the Prost team back in the 2000s, and he is now making his way, and he's done the best of anyone in the first sector at 32.460, so he's continuing to keep the pace up here.
Yeah, and the car looks like it's got very good balance, very good grip. He was able to make the apex into turn 8 comfortably. You know, the car responded to the inputs on the wheel. So that second sector again, fastest overall, and all he's now got is the third sector, which no reason to believe he can't get another purple sector there. We see the purples for first and second sector almost identical in terms of distance, or certainly at time. So he slightly later apex into turn 14, lets the car run out then, and then the short sprint, then this mighty turn 15, lots of inside use of the racetrack, and doesn't abuse the exit, so he's using a little bit more on the inside to give him that a bit of extra space, and a 143.438.
Very good lap time then from Thomas Eng, comfortably the fastest we've seen so far this weekend. A 1:43.438, half a second quicker than René Rast, but Rast is looking quick actually. He's only 1,000th of a second slower than Thomas Eng in sector 1. Here is the German in the number 2 WRT Audi that's currently sitting down in 5th place in the championship. Level on points with Sergio Jimenez and Caca Bueno, so I suppose they're joint 4th technically, but Bueno and Jimenez have had a higher finish with that second place in the Slovakia ring last time out. Let's see what the middle sector is then. A 32.934, which again is only a 10th down on Thomas Eng. So this is going to put René Rast, I'd have thought, into the mid 43s. It might not be enough to take the top spot away from Thomas Eng, but it's all about being in the top 10 in this session as Rast dives through the final corner.
Interesting to see René Rast if he can get a personal best in this final sector, or he can get a fastest overall. Whereas Thomas Eng in that third sector, and he's now gone even quicker, and Rast chasing him just 0.138 of a second. So René Rast had a very strong exit, and in fact he's gone quickest. It's just 43.
So Rast went to the top.
He went to the top. The reason he went to the top, what I was trying to explain, was he went to the top because this car on its previous lap did not get a red sector in sector 3. It lost time to René Rast, where René Rast was personal best first, second sector, but the Audi was quickest overall in this sector. Now we're watching Thomas Eng. So Enger's got fastest sector 1, personal best sector 2 on this lap. Wait to see whether he can go purple in sector 3 on this lap. No, he doesn't, but he goes quickest again, 43.1.
Yeah, it was the first and second sectors there for Thomas Eng that really gave him that top spot. A 1:43.148 now, but a quick man out there is Jeroen Bleekemolen, who's gone reasonably quick in the first sector, quickest of anyone though in the second sector. Car 30 must respect track limits. That is Nelson Piquet Jr., who's currently in the pits, but Jeroen Bleekemolen will be coming across the line before too long to try and set a competitive lap time. We go on board now with Caca Bueno in the BMW Team Brazil car as he heads down towards the final corner, dropping through, and not a particularly strong lap this, and so the Brazilian pulls into the pits, and that's his session over for now. He'll probably go out in a couple of minutes time, and it's all about being inside the top 10 overall across the 2 qualifying sessions. Oh, okay, my apologies, it's Sergio Jimenez at the wheel of that Zero car. That's Caca Bueno sitting there, so it's Jimenez at the wheel. They haven't changed the transponders over, but it's all about being in the top 10 across the aggregated times for the 2 sessions. Here now is Jeroen Bleekemolen, who is currently 3rd quickest, 0.3 of a second behind Thomas Eng, and he's just done a personal best in the 1st sector. Roaring.
No, is that a tyre rub on the body? Certainly, just saw the load on the right rear as he went through turn 9, and I haven't noticed that before from the Lamborghini, but it's clearly again doing the same thing as it drops down on the exit of 11 up into turn 12, now into turn 13. So let's keep an eye on that as to why it looks slightly weird as the Mercedes pulls off one of the 2 sports and new cars.
Yep, it's Paolo Pinheiro who's been off at the 1st corner.
But just watching the back of the Jeroen Bleekemolen car, and it's not going to do it through turn 15 because all the load is on the left rear, but strange we should see a tyre rub coming from that car from that 1 corner. So
Bleekemolen comes across the line and he improves his lap time, so he's now just 2.5 of a second slower than Thomas Enger. That was the spin for Paolo Pinheiro. Didn't really tell us much more, I suppose, because he pretty much arrived backwards.
Got it wrong on the brakes. Steph Dusseldorf, fastest overall. Sector 1, personal best. Sector 2, good away a challenge to the top 3. Got car ahead of him as he comes up into turn 13, and that's going to be one of the McLarens going to get out of the way. And Dusseldorf has been compromised by the McLaren. That's the last thing you need when you're on a quick lap, is to have that interference from another car. You can't do anything about it, and all you're going to do is see the time just ebb away. So Steph Dusseldorf will be disappointed that his potential top 3 time, where does he finish up as it happens? Steph Dusseldorf stays in 6th place.
Yep, so he lost a good half a second or so on that final lap. Here is Jeroen Bleekemolen, who's done the best of anyone in the 1st and 2nd sectors, purple in sectors 1 and 2, so this could be a very, very good lap for Bleekemolen. He comes into the final sector now.
Not noticing that little puff of blue from the right rear. Now, whether that was what we assumed to be a tyre contact or bodywork, or whatever it is, this car fastest in 1st and 2nd sectors overall. And now this is where the Lamborghini was maybe slightly less strong than some of the other cars, but Bleekemolen, he is sitting there as he always does. Can he make it?
Across the line then comes Jeroen Bleekemolen and goes quickest.
42.7.
A 42.749. That is massive. 0.4 of a second quicker than anyone else. But Laurens Vanthoor in the number 1 Audi is out there lapping quickly. Don't forget, this isn't for pole position. This is just to get through to the pole position shootout, where the top 10 cars will do battle. Here is Laurens Vanthoor out there in the number 1 WRT Audi. They've had 2 pole positions so far this season. They've also had 2 qualifying race wins, but somehow find themselves down in 7th place in the championship.
Alex Zanardi saw him coming, got out of the way. Good job from the Italian driver, not having any bearing on Laurens Vanthoor's. And again, the McLaren, the same car we saw Steph Dusseldorf get caught behind a couple of laps ago, now coming into play for Laurens Vanthoor, and again just closes the door. I mean, Vanthoor's going to be furious because his lap has been destroyed as the McLaren slow through turn 14 in preparation to starting a lap now has caused all sorts of problems for the Belgian driver in the Audi, and you can see that this is not a very happy man.
My word.
Not happy in the least.
Wow, I thought they were going
in fact, I think that could see a penalty, because that was clearly a loss of time, and there we're going to see it. Now look at this stupidity.
It's all got a bit angry. Oh, look at that, Vanthoor slowing down as he comes into that 3rd corner, maybe a little more so than he needed to. Pulls over to the side.
I mean, that's Chris van der Drift. He should know better.
Yeah. And coming up behind all these guys is now Alex Zanardi in the BMW. There is Pierre Dieudonné watching on, and that was a shame for Vanthoor. He lost so much time in that final sector. The 2 of them still locked together.
The problem is Chris van der Drift is inside the top 10. He's presently 8th. So he is. Let's see it again. What's going on? Laurens Vanthoor just lifts off. Van der Drift comes, and well,
a little further on. I didn't. a little further on, I thought maybe Vanthor brake tested him a little bit.
But what Vanthor was doing was just lifting off the throttle. He wasn't even just letting the car roll in effect. But I think there's a very good case for Chris van der Drift being brought in and asked to explain why did he impede a car that was on a flying lap when you were about to go on to your lap.
There is Mateusz Lasowski at the wheel of the number 4 WRT Audi, the Silver Cup car, coming down through the final corner, and he's followed by Stefan Ortelli, currently 6th overall at the moment. Ortelli, as he comes across the line, not a particularly strong lap this one. He remains in 6th place. Vanthor has still gone up to 3rd place in all of that, but he's half a second down off your own Bleekemolen at the top of the timing screens.
Well, from the entry into turn 14 all the way through 15 and all the way down the straight, you could say he comfortably lost half a second minimum to the McLaren Bitech, McLaren driven by Chris van der Drift. So I will be curious again to see whether that is raised either by WRT. They might feel that they were hard done by, albeit that it in effect doesn't have any bearing right now on what will happen in the final of the 3 sectors of qualifying, because it is the 3rd one. Vanthor is in 3rd place presently, provisionally, and with 8 seconds to go, there's little prospect of that much change occurring.
Over the crest, down through the right-handed final corner, and across the line comes Sergio Jimenez. We go on board with the Brazilian BMW, currently in 8th place. It doesn't look like this will be an improvement for him. It's not. It's about half a second slower as the Brazilian squad watch on, but that may be enough to get that 0 car through into the top 10. We'll have to wait and see once the times are amalgamated at the end of the session. Here now, out there is Stefan Ortelli. He's done personal bests in sectors 1 and 2, and actually they're pretty quick lap times. This could move him up towards the top 5, somewhere near sort of Max Book area in 5th position. Max Book's done a 43.376. Now here comes Ortelli towards the line in the WRT Audi. Where's he going to jump up to? 6th place, so just a couple of tenths behind Max Book. So no improvement for Ortelli in terms of position, but he improves his time a little bit. Max Book is out there and he's not going particularly fast. His middle sector, both of his sectors have been sort of all right. He might be able to improve if he gets a good run through the final sector, but he's had 2 Royale BMWs up in front of him. So Book comes across the line, currently in 5th place, and he does not improve, about a tenth of a second slower than he has been previously.
Interestingly, just over the years we've been coming to Portimao, there appear to be more and more bumps developing on the circuit. On the access route off the main Auto A22 motorway, there are a lot of bumps appearing. We noticed them this morning coming in, and whether it's to do just with everything, the settlement of land, or whether there is a bit of movement, but it is notable around certain parts of the racetrack that the bumps are becoming more of a factor.
Well, when I was here for Formula 2 a couple of years ago, and in the single seaters, obviously they're much
more
stiffer suspension and more sensitive, and the drivers were saying they were getting headaches from the start-finish straight because it's just so bumpy all the way down, and it is certainly becoming a characteristic of this Portimao circuit, as we see Giorgio Pantano, who finished that session 14th quickest, half a second or so slower than his teammate Chris van der Drift. So that's an impressive performance from van der Drift, despite any misdemeanors he may or may not have committed out there in terms of getting out of the way of quicker cars behind him. As we go on board with Pantano coming back into the pit lane. A great view, this. Yes,
and you can see from on board the McLaren, I mean, this is as pure to being a racing car as a GT car can become. The monocell McLaren has got this carbon fibre, effectively a Formula 1 technology monocell, and it gives great rigidity to the car, but of course other aspects of the formula and the balance of performance is all having to be taken into account. So what technically should be by far and away the quickest car out there has got penalties added to bring its performance maybe down to the level of others, rather than letting everybody go on develop, you know, willy-nilly and end up with a domination which is not what we're trying to achieve.
So the cars that are through to Q3 are that man there, your own Blancpain in car number 28, and Thomas Enger is also through. Just seeing what the differences are, and it looks actually as though it's that second session that has pretty much decided the top 10. Yeah, so it's going to be the top 10 from this session that go through to Q3. Sometimes we get a few odd ones making it through, having set a good lap time in the first qualifying segment, but here they're all from segment 2, so we'll give you a rundown when we get the top 10 order in a few moments time. But there you can see the two BMW Team Brazil cars, and they've got one of their cars through, that Zero car there, which will be taken by Sergio Jimenez in Q3. Here's a look at the results then after Q2, and it's these top 10 cars that will be going through to take in the pole position shootouts. Your own Blancpain, quickest man of anyone, at 1 minute 42.749, 4/10 quicker than the other Lamborghini of Thomas Enger, and it will be Enger taking part in the pole position shootout. Third place then for Laurens Vanthoor. He looked quick, and it looked like he may have had the chance to get into that sort of Lamborghini territory, but he was held up on his final hot lap around the circuit. Then fourth place, and René Rast looking very quick. Fifth for Max Buch, a strong performance from the Mercedes, 0.6 of a second down on the Lamborghini, but the Lamborghinis look really strong here, and Max Buch and Max Goetz always stronger in the race compared to the qualifying session. Stefan Ortelli did a good job to make it through to the top 10 as well, 6th place for him. All three of the HTP Mercedes are through into the top 10 shootout, which is an impressive achievement. HTP really performing strongly. And there is Stef Dusseldorp, who qualified in 7th place, and it will be Stef Dusseldorp who takes part in the pole position shootout. Caco Bueno and Sergio Jimenez in 8th place. As I say, Jimenez will be in that car. Chris van der Drift getting the Bitec McLaren through to the top 10 of qualifying. Very impressive performance from Chris van der Drift, because that McLaren has not been strong all season, but now it looks like he's starting to get things together. And 10th place for Luca Wolf and Luca Stoltz, and it will be Luca Stoltz who will run the car in Q3. So that means that 11th downwards, this is how the grid will line up. No ginormous surprises, I suppose, except for the Royal BMWs. Actually, I don't think we had the 76 car go out in that session. The Thomas Jaeger Dominic Baumann car. I don't think we've seen it out there, because we've only got 21 cars on the results.
I think you're right, because that's the car that's missing.
So they will have to start right at the back of the grid.
Indeed, they will do. And they did start at the back of the grid, if you may remember, in the championship race, and came through and won it. So it's not impossible, but it is often the case that you might need the benefit of a safety car intervention, or something that is, let's say, outside of the control of the drivers in the race. But disappointment, because that was a strong performance we saw in Slovakia. Very impressive overtaking, particularly we saw from Dominic Baumann as he made his way through the field. And to have to go and repeat the same thing on an entirely different circuit layout with this rise and fall. I mean, Slovakia is a good circuit, but I think this is a much more challenging racetrack of the two.
So there's Thomas Enger sitting at the wheel of his G-Drive Lamborghini ahead of the final 10 minutes of qualifying here in the 5th round of the 2014 Blancpain Sprint Series. Started off in Nogaro, went to Brands Hatch, Zandvoort, Slovakia. Now we're here in Portugal. Then we go to Zolder in October, finishing off with the final round of the season in Azerbaijan on the streets of Baku in November, which is an event that I think we're all looking forward to after last season.
Do you realise that the Caspian Sea, for the sake of repeating myself, is not totally, well, it's not a freshwater lake, it's about a third saline. This was pointed out to me, and I had to look on Wikipedia. It's also about 3,000 something feet at its deepest, and I think its average depth is something like 600 feet deep.
Wow.
It's a very deep and a very large
and a very salty.
No, it's not salty. It's got a touch of the saline about it. That's what I would say now.
The final segment of qualifying then is underway. The top 10 shootout, and there you can see Jeroen Bleekemolen heading out onto the circuit. It's a simple 10-minute session. Quickest driver gets pole position. Over the past couple of seasons we've had you can only do a certain amount of laps and that sort of thing, but it's all just a straight shootout now for pole, and Jeroen Bleekemolen is the first man out on the circuit, and that's coming into the braking zone for turn 6, and that's where you can really see the bumps that John was talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and it's one of those areas in the racetrack, maybe more in the race itself, where you might think of it's a good opportunity to overtake, but if you're forced to use the bumpy line, it's something that you might feel slightly less encouraged to do. So the number 1 Lamborghini, Laurens van Thor, leaves the pit lane. Now I wonder as he calmed down, because he will not have been happy with that. What wasn't deliberate blocking, but it was certainly a move that precluded Van Thor from doing the final sector at the full potential of both himself and of the number 1 Audi.
So Van Thor out on the circuit. No one has started their flying laps just yet. And we saw a clip, didn't we, of the 76 BMW being rolled back in, so we'll have to find out what happened to them after this session, and hopefully they'll be okay for the race, which is coming up later on at 1:45 local time is the start of the race. And now across the line then comes Jeroen Bleekemolen. We've seen the lap times getting quicker over the course of qualifying runs, so I'm expecting a similar story here today as Bleekemolen turns into the first corner. Then turn 2 is more of a kink than anything else, under braking now for 3.
Yeah, and just very quick on the exit of 2, you're hard on the brakes into 3. What will be, I think, interesting to see whether anybody has opted to use a fresh set of tyres for this qualifying session. It certainly was the case. I think that Bleekemolen would have had a brand new set of tyres on for Q2, but whether they would have opted to, or whether they have availability or not to do so here, for sure 32.5 fastest overall, but he's the only person on, well, there are 2 people who've gone through sector 1 on a flying lap. The other car is 28, and that's Jeroen Bleekemolen in this car we're looking at now.
Yes, and there's the rubbing again on the right rear, but it's Thomas Enge who's gone faster than Bleekemolen in the first sector. But as you say, John,
Bleekemolen's now gone fastest. Again, that rub on the right rear, we noticed we thought it had gone away, but in fact it's still there. Now whether that is maybe that they have changed the set of tyres, and there is just fractions of a millimetre of the tyre that is just catching on the right rear bodywork, and it does actually wear away, and therefore that's why we thought we saw no more coming from that right rear.
So Bleekemolen across the line. Pole position is going to be somewhere in the 42s, maybe the mid to low 42s, and Bleekemolen jumps straight in there with a 42.883. But here comes Thomas Enge, who is quickest so far in the first and second sectors, and it's a 42.589 for him. So the gauntlet has been laid down by those 2 at the start of this session. What's Laurens van Thor got in the bag? He's done a 32.5 in sector 1, which is the same as Bleekemolen. His middle sector's a couple of the tenths down on Bleekemolen, so this is going to be a low 43 most likely for Van Thor.
Audi's very good in turn 14. It turns in extremely well. That's a feature of the Audi. Has got this good turn in. It's sometimes not quite so stable in the high-speed corners. Van Thor runs it slightly wide in the middle of turn 15. Doesn't use more than he feels is allowable. So Laurens van Thor most likely going to go third, and he does, 43.026.
So Van Thor across the line. Now coming out is René Rast, who's done some reasonable sectors. Let's see where this puts him. It's 4th place, a low 43 for René Rast as well, a 43.298. What's Stefano Telli got? 3 WRT Audis through into the final top 10 shootout, and Ortelli goes 4th.
Quicker than René Rast.
Yep. So we'll see whether the lap times continue to develop. Interestingly, they haven't done so for Thomas Eng. He's about 6 tenths down in the first sector and a second down in the second sector, so I wonder if he's sort of having a lap off to give the tyres a bit of rest.
I would say he's just giving the tyres a bit of rest. 4 3/4 minutes to go. Maximilian Buch comes over the hill across the start-finish line. First of the Mercedes goes fourth quickest, 43.155.
So Max Buch coming through, and here's Sergio Jimenez, who is looking reasonable. I don't think that BMW is quite going to have the pace to challenge for pole position. I think if they can get on the top 3 rows of the grid, that would be a good performance from the Brazilian BMW guys. Through the right-hander. Jimenez and Bueno, who finished second in Slovakia. They finished third in both of the races at Brands Hatch. It's been a much stronger season so far this for the Brazilian BMW team, as they now climb over the crest and come across the line. What sort of lap time is this going to be? It's a 7th place, a 43.358.
Jimenez well inside the track limits. I mean, the first car I've seen on a flying lap that hasn't had 2 wheels straddling the demarcation line. That's the line, the red and white line, as we look at the 85 Mercedes-Benz. And Stef Dusseldorp, 8th quickest, 143.5, just under a second away from Thomas Enger's lap time.
Here's Stefan Ortelli. He has done personal bests in the first and second sectors. This might get him up into the 42s. Across the line he comes, yes, a 42.862. Very quick final sector, so he's up to second place for the time being. With 3 minutes and 15 seconds to go, it's still Thomas Enger on provisional pole position with a 1 minute 42.589. As we now watch Maximilian Buch. There's his teammate Max Goetz as Buch comes out of the final corner.
Yeah, no, that's just Ortelli's time, fastest in third sector. I suspect maybe there's been a fresh set of tyres fitted. You don't find the length, the amount of time that Ortelli did find just simply by going out and getting a clear lap.
Bleekemolen jumps up to second quickest then. He puts Ortelli back down to third as Max Buch goes fourth quickest. Lawrence Vanthoor is the man who's struggling at the moment, down in 5th place. Cars 1, 2, 9 and 61 are all under investigation for track limits meanwhile, as up over the crest comes Marc Basseng, who's made it through into the final segment of qualifying, and he goes 9th quickest of 43.823. Now here comes Jimenez.
So let's see how this BMW takes a lot of the track on the inside at the apex. Previously he didn't run wide. This time that's a more normal exit I would expect, and there should be a quicker lap from the Brazilian, currently 7th, and Jimenez stays in 7th.
Okay, so no improvement from him. What's Vanthoor got? He has done a personal best in Sector 1. Bleekemolen's the man to watch. He's done fastest of anyone in Sector 1, but let's see what Vanthoor can do. No improvement for Vanthoor. 2/10 slower than his previous lap time.
So it's really, the show's going to be about one driver. That's Jerome Bleekemolen, fastest Sector 1. Sector 2, well, 3/10 down on the time Thomas Enger did on the respective laps. Vanthoor running wide, just about getting away with it. And the ever vigilant eye being kept on the Audi WRT team.
Yep, Vincent Voss watching on, but here's Bleekemolen. So his first sector is very good. His middle sector is okay. He's only about half a tenth of a second slower than the quickest middle sector of anyone, so this could be a good lap for your own Bleekemolen. Is it going to be enough to give him provisional pole position? Thomas Enger's coming to the pits. His challenge is over. It's Bleekemolen across the line. Does he go to the top? No, he doesn't. A poor final sector for Bleekemolen, and he remains in second place. Now, is that it, or has he got one lap left in these tyres? Who else is out there meanwhile? Dusseldorp's on quite a good lap in the 85 HTP Mercedes. Here now is the number 1 Audi of Lawrence Vanthoor, and he's nowhere near. He will be pulling into the pits at the end of this lap. He's 1.6 seconds down. Well, unless he can squeeze in another lap, actually. He might have a chance to...
It's going to be very close. He, more or less, he's going to get across the start-finish line, I think, before the checkered flag brings this final qualifying session to an end. But Jerome Bleekemolen, although he didn't achieve that pole position, looked like he was still pushing on that first sector. Whether he will continue to do so, I suspect the time has gone. It will be simply, there's a certain amount of time in your tyres. You can't make the best use of the tyre. You're not really going to recover from it.
So across the line comes Stef Dusseldorp. Any improvement from him? No, he remains down in 8th position. Stefan Ortelli's just done a personal best in the middle sector. Jeroen Bleekemolen has just done the fastest of anyone in the second sector. So Bleekemolen's got another crack at this. Still Thomas Enger is sitting in the pits. And at the moment, Bleekemolen, well, it's absolutely neck and neck. There is Thomas Enger. He's nervy, isn't he?
Well, he would be. Sitting back, you know, he's come into the pits thinking I've done a good enough job, 42.589. I think it is still going to be good enough. As you see Jerome Blekemolen pulling gears on the steering wheel, down through turn 15, big commitment, big G loading to come out to the exit of the corner. Now straighten the car up, and the rush across start-finish line, 42.589 to beat. He doesn't.
No, he stays in second place, so it's pole position for the G-Drive Lamborghini. There's still a few cars out there. René Rast has done a reasonable Sector 1, so we won't count our chickens just yet. As out of the final corner comes Marc Basseng. He doesn't look like he'll improve, maybe remaining down in 9th position for the time being. Across the line he comes at 1 minute 44.046. Still celebrations going on in the G-Drive garage. René Rast's middle sector isn't particularly strong either, so I think it is now safe to say that Thomas Enger and Roman Rusanov have taken pole position. As they come now, this is René Rast into the final couple of corners, and he may well even decide to abandon. He's slowed down there.
Yeah, I think he's slowed down, but there's traffic ahead of him, and oh, big snappy for Stef Dusseldorp and the Mercedes coming over the crest. And I assume that we're going to see the number 2 Audi go back into the pit lane, as it does indeed. So there was a point at which you're going to say, well, there's nothing left, I can't do anymore, and on top of which a lot of traffic was congregating up at turn 13 and 14, so any chance he had of getting a run through those 2 final corners down to 15, pretty much gone.
There was Lukas Stoltz. He tried to improve, and he set a 1 minute 43.897, good enough for... Well, we had 11 cars out in that session, so I'm not quite sure.
I don't know how that one, that's sort of a bit of a strange one.
No, so...
maybe because of the Brazilian, or sorry, the Portuguese car was, for some reason... No, it's not it's the HTP.
Yeah.
No, it's not the Portuguese. The 2 sports and new cars. So that's strange. We got 11 cars out. Either there was a... Yeah, Thomas. Yeah, Thomas. Why can you not look more like a racing driver than a football fan?
He's very happy, isn't he?
Oh, he should be. He's a great driver. He's a great driver. I mean, a man who really, if and or but, could have had a career in Formula 1, and well, you know, there have not been too many Czech drivers who have made it into Formula 1. He's one of the few that is there on merit, not just simply on having a big budget to get him there.
So they will now wait for the drivers to come back to Parc Fermé, as you can see them in there, before we get underway with the qualifying race later on this afternoon. So let's have a look at the results of qualifying 3, and this is how the grid will line up. On pole position, it'll be Thomas Enger and Roman Rusanov in the G-Drive Racing Lamborghini. Lamborghini the car to have because they share the front row of the grid with Jeroen Blekemolen and Harry Projik in the Grasser Racing Lamborghini. 3rd place on the grid, René Rast and Enzo Ede. Good performance from Rast to take 3rd place, and strong performance as well from Max Buch. 4th place in the HDP Mercedes, just 3.5 tenths down on Thomas Enger. 5th and 6th will be the 2 WRT Audis of Laurence Vanthor and Stefan Ortelli. They put in some good laps to be in 5th and 6th place. 7th place for the highest BMW. Caco Bueno and Sergio Jimenez will start that car from 7th on the grid. 8th place for Stef Dusseldorp. I think he'll be a bit disappointed with that because they had good pace. But, well, we've just had a few... The best time of car 9 and best time of car 1 have just been removed. I don't know whether that's already happened.
Well, that was Ortelli, and maybe that's where Ortelli's time came from, because he suddenly leapt forward, up the timing. He ended up in overall in 6th, but
we'll wait and see what happens with that one. But Afanasieff Dusseldorp there in 8th place, 9th for Marc Basseng, and 10th for Chris van der Drift, with Lukas Stoltz in 11th place. So, yeah, those best times removed. I don't know if they will be removed or we've already removed them. We'll have to wait and see, but Stefan Ortelli nevertheless showing he's still got it just a 10th of a second slower than his teammate Laurence Vanthor.
He's just found out his best times were taken away.
Yeah, looks like it. A shrug of the shoulders. So let's have a look back at the best moments from that qualifying session here in Algarve. It was a frantic pace, and it really is a frantic circuit for these drivers, using all of the curbs and a little bit more.
Yeah, well, they're using a lot of curb on the inside and a lot of curb on the runoff on the outside. There was the spin at turn 15, something you don't really want to do high-speed spin like that for Fabre and Humprecht. So that was a brief shot we saw of that Schubert BMW. We didn't get to see much more of it.
No, he came out in the first session, but they didn't manage to get out in the second session, so we'll have to try and find out exactly what happened there. There was a bit of toing and froing with Van Thor and Chris van der Drift as they got a bit frustrated, but it was Jeroen Bleekemolen who was looking for one of the quickest men out there. It was going to be a battle with the Lamborghinis between him and that man there, Thomas Enger. It was Thomas Enger who took pole position, and he and Roman Rusenav will start on pole position for the qualifying race, which is coming up later on. We're starting at 1:30 Portuguese time. Make sure you join us.